There we go. Okay, now this meeting's being recorded, and just for the record, Amir was just giving us an update on the managed audit program. There's an email out for folks that want to read more details. They're pushing forward and trying to get more companies and foundations to help sponsor this work. So cool. We have one item on the agenda today. Jeff Mendoza from Google is going to give an intro to this GitHub app we've been working on. And is there any other items folks would like to discuss? I don't think that will take the full hour.
If we had time, I had an idea based on some discussions that were had earlier in the week about the White House executive order. And there was some good info on that and a breakdown of kind of what part of that executive order could apply to our work group. And I put it up in our working notes as a future topic idea, but if we're looking for something to do, I think it'd be a really good tabletop exercise to kind of just start tackling some of that and coming up with some ideas, something that we can actually refer to as well, have something documented. It doesn't have to say, it doesn't have to be super official. It could just say that these are some thoughts that we've had and some ideas based on discussion.
I agree with that. I've been doing a lot of thinking and talking and discussing and workshopping that topic in our little world. So I think it would be great to talk more here.
Yeah, David Wheeler put out a really great post too from the Linux Foundation that I think he plugged a lot of the stuff that's been happening. So, right, David?
I did. I looked for everybody I could plug and stuck in there. So hopefully that will result in more people, well, at least knowing about it and hopefully even using or helping.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, let's talk about that if we have time at the end. And then any other topics to add? Quick. Do we have anyone on the package analysis project that wants to give an update? I was going to clean up a doc that I had written a little while ago and merge it into the repo. Anyone from that project?
Who is in the package analysis, actually?
So we do have a couple of Googlers working on it. I don't see them on the call right now. And I've definitely seen other names in the project and that are active on it, so I'm not sure who they are unless I go digging.
Okay. Kim, would you mind sharing emails with me? Oh, hey, look. Abhishek? I think he's one of them, actually.
I don't know. Abhishek, do you work on the package analysis project too, or is that mostly Laurent and Oliver?
Yeah, mostly Oliver and Laurent started contributing to it.
Cool. So yeah, I can connect you, David, if you have something.
Yes, I would. I just posted a note, by the way, just a quick FYI, hopefully. Jim Zemlin has asked me to create hey, if we wanted to fund a whole bunch of things and fix open source software security and supply chain, what would we do? Can you make me a list? I need that in the budget tomorrow.
Has Jim provided any more details, like why he's asking? I just don't want to give folks a bunch of work if we don't really understand. I don't know if you can share or not, but just.
I think basically I don't have much more other than I think he thinks he needs something quick in his back pocket to at least have something to start shopping. I think of it as a marketing way to enter in. Hey, there are things that can be done, but you'll need money. So it's I'm not trying to make it that list. I'm just to be clear that I'm not claiming that list is going to be an open SSF approved vetted list. There's no time for that anyway. So I think he just wants something to shop.
Okay. Sounds good. All right, cool. Any other topics to add? I guess we've covered a couple shorter things. No? All right, Jeff, it is all you. Do you want to share your screen? Yeah, you can just share your screen.
Yeah, hold on a sec. But yeah, I just wanted to say, as you mentioned, I'm Jeff Mendoza. I work at Google on the open source security team, and I have a prototype of a GitHub app that I wanted to share, do a demo and gauge interest and see if I could get any feedback on it. I sent an email to the mailing list yesterday morning, and it's just a very high-level overview. Essentially, the app is going to be installed by an org owner on an org, and then configured with configuration to enable or disable certain policies or certain options in those policies, and then it will see if the repos are compliant and take an action based on that detection of compliance. So I'm going to share a window. See if that comes up. All right. So I have the code here of the prototype, and I'll just go over a very quick section of the code just to kind of reiterate what I was just covering. Essentially, the app would be based on GitHub webhooks typically, but for the prototype, we can list the installations and repos of the app, and then run policies on every repo that the app's installed on. Run policies will run a check for each policy that's been developed. The policies aren't meant to be plugins. They're going to be, they have a clean interface, and we can accept contributions for policies in the future. And then based on if the policy doesn't pass, there's an action that you can configure for each policy. So different org owners might want to have different actions. Log is just to log the status. Issue will be to create a GitHub issue, which I have the code. I'll demonstrate that. Potential other actions might be email. And then fix would be if the policy is something that can be fixed in code very easily, that could be written up so that if a setting's not set, that setting could just be toggled. All right, so I have a test app in my own account with the prototype code running behind it, and I've installed it on my own account here with three repositories. So the way it's configured is through a org level repo. Now this configuration is optional. You could have repo level configuration, but it's easiest to do it at the org level. And by default, when you install the app, it's set into opt-in mode, which you would have to actually list repos that you want to opt in. That way you can install it on your whole org and not get a bunch of messages at once. You have to go ahead and enable it. So I'm going to go ahead and change it to opt out instead of opt in. And that's going to turn on the bot. But then I have a configuration per policy. So the first policy I wrote is branch protection. And the default here, again, is that it's on an opt out, on an opt in. And I'm going to change it to opt out. Not true. And then also the default action would be log, but I want to change it to issue. And as you can see here are all the other defaults. It enforces that PR approvals are required, approval count 1, dismiss stale, block force, etc. All of these are just GitHub API settings on the branch protection. So when I commit that, and then I'm going ahead and running the bot in another window, I can go over here to my issues, and I can see that actually everything's passing right now because I have these repos configured correctly. But if I go ahead and edit it again and say, let's say, set approval count required to 3, and then run my bot. Then maybe refresh here. I can see that it went ahead and created an issue, or actually opened an old issue that I had on this repo, saying that I have a security policy violation and branch protection. Branch protection is the name of the policy, so different policies will have different names. And then it tells me exactly which setting that I have out of compliance. So reopening this, and again, on the settings, I could go ahead and make this repo out of compliance for other things, such as unchecking there and checking here. Oops. And then if I were to say, like, close this issue, let's say, like, go away. And then rerun the bot. It's going to reopen the issue and find a bunch of other things wrong with it. Also, the configuration on the issue could be to ping the issue after so many hours. Like if it's open and nothing's being done, it could ping it every 24 hours. That's the default I have right now. But again, I'm really just trying to show the concept here. The GitHub issue would just be one action, could be email, could be fix. I mean, branch protection would be a very easy policy to fix. And again, branch protection is just one policy. So we have ideas on policies for your security MD setup, your some of the thing, a lot of the checks and scorecard can be kind of reconfigured into policies. Do you have dependency pinning? We can look at files in the repo, of course, instead of just GitHub settings. We can see what your GitHub action configuration is and see if there's anything unsafe there. So it's really a kind of an open slate and meant to be to grow over time mostly in policies, but also kind of in actions that people want to see their results show up in. Any questions? Anything else? Anybody wants to see me demo? I have a few other things here.
Jeff, remind me the name of it. Is this so? This is out there now, or is it yet to be made public, or it's like
it's currently a private right now. So
okay,
yeah,
okay, cool. And you're going to call it All-Star?
That was an idea, thanks, from Dan on my team, that if you use this with scorecard, you can be an all-star.
Hey, you're an all-star. Get your game on. This sounds good. Yeah.
Get a high score.
We'd be excited to put it inside the OSSF repo. Like right now, this is just a demo. So.
I have one question.
Yeah.
Which is, imagine a company using this. How would they deal with the GitHub API usage limits? Like if you really had a lot of repos, you're a big software company. Is there a way around that, or do you just need to generate a bunch of personal access tokens and use them?
Yeah, great question. And quota is a big problem with GitHub. So this is developed as a GitHub app. And the way it works is apps have quota per installation. And so when you install this on the org, you get quota for your org. And so we or somebody could run the app and let other people install it, and they wouldn't actually have to run it themselves. Of course, it's open source. Anybody can run it if they wish.
Okay.
And the quota will be based on the installation in the org, and GitHub scales the quota based on the number of repos and the number of users in the org. So it's actually pretty generous, and it will scale again per installation per org. And the app is using I'll show you.
It's running within the org, so the tokens aren't a big deal in this case.
Yeah, so it doesn't use personal access tokens, and we are using some caching. So based on GitHub, which has conditional requests. So if a bunch of policies are requesting the same resource over and over again in each run, we'll use the e-tag to not scoop up too much quota there as well. So it is kind of written in with quota preservation in mind, and then of course choosing to make it an app to kind of get the generous quota you get there versus an OAuth app or something you would run with a personal access token.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
So you've already mentioned the protected branch, the and requiring additional reviewers. What are some of the other? Can you list some additional policies that you could do you haven't mentioned so far that you think people might want to do?
Yeah, so the ones I mentioned were anything on branch protection, the security policy, which would be the security MD. I had a couple other anything in GitHub Action, because that's a file in the repo.
I think dependency pinning you mentioned. There could be secrets as well, like GitHub secrets that you put inside the app and settings.
Making sure Dependabot is turned on could be one. Something that we've thought about, but we're not sure because there's other tools that do this, is managing the people in the repo, in the organization. So if you want to list the people here and then make it can ensure that those people are there, or let you know if there's somebody added somebody that you didn't expect. But yeah, I think I would want to do some compare that to some existing tools that already kind of do that for you.
Argon.io does that.
Mm-hmm.
You can check it out. I'll put the link in the comments here.
Thanks. But again, the policy interface, is going to be pretty clean, and I intend to have a very thorough developer guide for writing policies. We should be able to accept policies that maybe only one person's going to use, but they're turned off by default or highly configurable. Again, it's pretty straightforward. You check, fix. You get a GitHub client, and anything you can check for with the client to the repo with the and then give a true or false will be something that we can add as a policy.
By the way, this looks really, really cool. I think this is awesome. I mean, honestly, yeah, trying to implement more of these policies in GitHub, and I'm having this done. I think will be awesome. Having this available, really, really good.
Thanks.
Jeff, do we have plans when you're gonna make this public, or how much further you want to get before we can start recruiting?
So yeah, I just wanted to again demonstrate, gauge interest, get feedback. If this is something that could be a part of this working group, be an OSSF project, and what the process is.
And you said you sent some mail out on this, but I didn't actually see any email. Maybe I'm not on the right list. So if you could just maybe, I don't know, you could forward that to.
David, I can forward it to you.
Gracias. Thank you.
I found it. I'll post it in chat too. But yeah, I'm also working on a design doc that I can share with the group as well.
Sweet. Any other last questions for Jeff? I don't know if we can show a thumbs up, thumbs down. Oh wait, we have these. I don't know if they work for other people. Oh yeah, show me the thumbs up if you like it. All right, cool. Yeah, thank you, Jeff. I think this looks really cool.
Thanks.
Sweet. All right, and switching gears, I guess. Amir, do you want to kick off this discussion on the executive order?
Sure, I'd love to. Yeah. So kind of the thought process for this was to do essentially like a tabletop exercise on the two kind of main objectives that came out of the executive order that really apply pretty specifically to our work group, I would say. So I'm going to share my screen and see if I can do that. Let's see.
Well, while you're doing that, I don't know if everyone in the room is aware of what's happened, but the White House published an executive order on cybersecurity, I think maybe last week. And I will paste it in the chat.
May 12th.
May 12th, there we go. So that is what we're talking about. I just pasted the link in the video chat.
Awesome. Yeah. So can everybody see my screen?
Yep.
Okay. So the first one that that came out of this that I thought applied to the work group was the specific languages here off to the side. But basically, the objective is to publish a definition of the term critical software. Basically, in a sentence, can you tell me what is critical software? So I thought as a tabletop exercise, we could come up with a one-page document capturing some thoughts on that and basically come up with our best version of what we think the definition of that term is. So I threw up a couple of just really basic questions here, you know, what it is not, other things that we could consider. So I'll open that up to the group to discussion. You know, what would we say, you know, is critical software? I know it's really, it sounds simple, but it's also very expansive. So just throwing some ideas out there, you know, there's no wrong answers here. I thought we could capture some thoughts and ideas if anyone wants to jump in.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that occurred to me, and I don't have the actual definition. This is really a good exercise to put thoughts together. I would think anything which operates at privilege, you know, level, anything which requires authentication, which uses a network. Those are. I mean, those are kind of some of the that uses crypto. You know, these are all sort of the elements that I kind of look for that kind of automatically, at least when we're looking at internal software, what are some of the things that really, you know, highlight. Okay.
Oh, and by the way, this document I've shared with the whole work group. So if you want to jump in and type stuff in too, you know, I figure the more the merrier. So, but I think that's definitely a great point. That was mentioned a little bit too in the executive order as well, talking about privilege and privilege escalation, things like that, integration with other dependencies. I think that's a pretty big one. Dependencies, the software interacts with. Good. It's a great start.
Yes.
Anything else come to mind for anyone?
So if I can, yeah, can I jump in? So I think there's
Yeah,
two issues. I'll want to go back to that list, but first, I think there's an overall issue there on what is critical software for whom. I think that is, you know, if you don't use it and nothing you depend on uses it, it's not critical software to you. It just doesn't matter. You know, it's got all the privileges, but I never use it. So no, and I think this is what actually causes lots of problems when we talk about what's critical software. What the US government thinks is critical software, they immediately start talking about, for example, energy systems, you know, dams, and electrical distribution systems, and, you know, petroleum delivery systems. Anyone? You know, they talk about what matters to the society. Or to like the critical government functions. So I think that's a challenge is, you know, what is it used in, by whom, and what will be the, and so what's the impact if things go wrong? And really, it's not so much the does it have privilege or not, it's the what's the societal impact, you know, or the impact to the using organization. So, you know, if your company goes out of business, that's bad. If your government ceases to have a working government or working country, that's bad. So getting back to that other list, you know, you know, I would also add, you know, wide use, because it's more likely to trigger the, you know, both by itself, it's more likely to trigger problems, and it's more difficult to fix it because, for example, if it's ubiquitously used, a lot of the processes we might use to fix it don't work either. I think that's an example of the problem with crypto libraries. You know, if the crypto libraries have a serious problem, you often can't talk about it quietly, and you can't easily update because the update mechanisms depend on the, you know, the crypto libraries.
Yeah, David, I was going to comment on what you're talking about. You know, critical software is one that's more based on the usage, right?
Yeah.
And the problem often with software, we all see this, right? Is some little side project somebody does turns into something that at some point in the future, now everybody's like depending their critical infrastructure on it. That's the whole, if you will, ethos for this work group, to try and identify those things and try and address them, right? And
Right.
so I think if you think about the problem from not just the U.S. government, but any organization is, you know, at the this thing could get used everywhere or nowhere. Let's just put some sort of stamp on it that says, well, no matter where it gets used, we can head off this sort of thing in terms of how it's developed, you know, before it gets used everywhere, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. Absolutely. What else? What else? What else does the work group think?
Daniel dropped a potential definition in the chat. Can you see that, Amir?
Oh, let me check it out. Okay.
Almost circular though. You have to start with you have to start with the societal stuff, and then you use that definition that Daniel posted to do the transitive closure. So I think that's the transitive closure part.
Yeah, sorry, I was eating my dinner, so couldn't speak. Yeah, it was just we were coming up with definitions of things that we considered critical, and I just wanted to make sure that we had the transitive statement that said, therefore, anything that we need in order that those critical things continue to function is also critical.
Right.
So, you know, you might not consider GNU core utils to be critical by all of your other definitions there, but if they stop working, none of your critical software is going to keep working.
Right. Right. So you really start with, you know, what's the important to the organization or government or society, and then you back up with the transitive closure to bring in everything else that they depend on.
Yeah, dependencies I definitely think is a big factor here. Dependencies and how widespread it is. What about like what's it called? Availability of alternatives, or you know, if one thing is, let's say, important, but there's 10 other things that can do it very similarly, you know, is it as critical as something where there's only 1 or 2 projects doing that particular function? That's something that comes to mind. Does that make sense at all, or am I kind of...
I think functional equivalence with other pieces of software reduces criticality of the project, but doesn't necessarily make the software less critical to the use case.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. What about if we flip the script? So sometimes I think it helps when you think about what something is, you think about what it is not. So does anything come to mind from anyone when we're thinking of, well, what is critical software not, or what is not critical software?
I would say probably something that only handles internal data that's trusted.
Do you mean that the data is trusted or the software is trusted?
The software doesn't necessarily have to be trusted if all you're handling is trusted data, right?
What if it exfiltrates data?
I mean, it would depend on the access level of the machine itself, correct? I'm thinking like software that you run in a VM to do data analysis, for example.
Oh, like
software whose failure will not cause a failure of business process.
Right, right.
So interesting. I was thinking, for me, having open table not work is really critical, right? But for somebody else, it might not be. I'm just, I don't use open table anymore because I can't go to restaurants. But I'm just saying, it is very context dependent. Is a game, high-end game that's software, is a critical software? Maybe not to you, maybe to somebody else. It's interesting. But that's an example of not critical, software would be something that's like consumer software or something of that sort, at least as far as the executive order is concerned.
Right, but let's say, the software that's controlling the way that my cell phone can control the lights in this room fails. That might not be critical to me, but it might be critical to someone who is, in some sense, mobility impaired, and that's the only way that they can get illumination. So it really does come back down to David's comment of who are we answering the question for, in order to be able to say whether or not any given piece of software in its context is critical.
Yeah, I mean, and we're also discussing prioritization here. So, I mean, you could always argue that your compromised light bulbs could then go DDoS subservice and knock out something critical. So you could argue almost everything is critical in that context.
Yeah. So critical to maybe something like just critical to the general function of society. I mean, is that too high level or?
I'll flip it around just a little. I mean, it makes me think of thinking about, it's also about avoiding harm, not just about capturing benefits, but if there's widespread harm inflicted, and I realize that then requires a definition of harm, be that economic or physical harm, that also seems to me that's related, but I don't have a crisp definition for you. Okay,
no, that's a good point, and yeah, no, the whole point of the exercise is just to get some ideas out there. So this is good stuff. It's definitely a good start. And then other considerations / definitions / resources I put here as well, because a lot of things, there's a lot of people already doing these, and we don't want to necessarily recreate the wheel with a lot of other efforts. So I thought if there were other resources, white papers, I know some decent research came out of the EU FOSSA work that I could probably dig through and come up with some resources here. I'm curious if any other resources or other things that are already being done come to mind that we could maybe use as reference or to look at to see, are we on the right track, or get some ideas from. I mean, NIST comes to mind as like our accreditation bodies come to mind right away as well. I'm just curious if anything else comes to mind for the work group.
One thing I wanted to mention is the criticality score. So the problem with a lot of these approaches is it's like manual work. So it never really scales to, let's say, X 100 or X 1000 libraries. So maybe automation is some part we should think about, where how we can derive many of these things in a more automated fashion, and maybe thinking about like extending criticality score, which started as an OpenSF project, to account for these factors.
Yeah, that's a good point. Great point. Yeah. That's why I was kind of trying to get generic sort of identifiers, like does it touch a network? The other is, the other approach to this, Amir, is it maybe Like, what are there categories of software that we'd say this thing really is critical? Like, I'd say an operating system, right? Like, I'd say a Linux distribution, right? That's critical software. Boom.
Yeah.
What else?
That's
Non-critical software would be the latest, game.
right. That's a great point that you bring up, because actually part 2 of the executive order is actually, once we get an idea of what critical software is, the goal is to come up with basically some categorizations and then basically come up with a list of projects that we would actually call critical projects. So I'm glad that you thought that. That means we must be on the right track. I would say OS is definitely definitely a category of software when you think about that. Absolutely. So I mean, since we're already kind of building some momentum there, do any other categories immediately come to mind with folks? I mean, you have like the database level. I know there's a bunch of the different layers that go with the development.
I'd like to avoid it, but I would think. Sorry, Dave. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say. I mean, we could go down this path, but I'm almost a little afraid to. I mean, OS and databases and so on. But once we start going further, there's an endless number of categories. So I think we would be wiser to focus on more general principles. And in fact, for example, operating system, typically that is not just the kernel, but all the apps in it. And some of those, frankly, aren't critical. And I think we'll be wiser to focus more on the operational definition rather than trying to, it's an operating system, so it's critical. No, it's Multics. Nobody has used it in decades. We don't care. It's an operating system.
Yeah, but remember the goal here, David. I think it's important to understand why are we trying to define critical software? It's because once you identify those things, you're going to be asked to apply certain principles onto them, development, methodology, and prove that you're actually doing them if you want to sell them to the government. So ultimately, no one's trying to. If anyone's still trying to sell Multics to the government, God bless them. I just think it's which government? Probably not the U.S. I hope it's not. Maybe, who knows? Maybe they're still using ADA. But that's the goal of the exercise. So if you say, if you are producing an operating system, you better follow these principles. And by the way, you're only going to be having about a year to put them in place. So that's the value of something like an operating system that says that's in the category that says, okay, if you're going to sell an OS, and along these same lines, by the way, I was going to say, I shudder to even mention this, but probably I wonder if something at the level of a BIOS or a firmware or something like that is considered.
It should be. If it's not, there's a screw up.
I'm hideous, but yeah, it probably should be.
Firmware and frankly also management engines. Google
management,
can speak up about this, but I'm specifically thinking like Intel's IME. It's the other CPU that controls the CPU you talk about.
Yeah.
Same for the baseband processors of smartphones. Nobody runs Android or iOS. Everybody runs the main chip that controls everything doesn't run Android or iOS. It runs the weird cell phone stuff that nobody sees because you can't, and yet it was written typically in C with no buffer overflow protections. Hooray!
I think I touched a nerve there, Dave. It sounds like.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, you've got the firmware, you've got the CPU or IME/CPU control systems. Got databases. You've got low-level libraries like the C runtime. For web applications, you typically have web frameworks. There's literally, if you write
runtimes, runtime should definitely be in there. I'm thinking the Go runtime or Rust or any of those things would be a category, right? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Runtime systems. Absolutely.
Java virtual machine.
Well, even ones that don't have virtual machines, there is a runtime system. Even for C, there's a runtime system. So
yeah, absolutely. Oh yeah.
Yeah. Let's see here.
The build system. Is that what you mean by management engines?
No.
This is the sort of thing, as I understand this, Dave, this is things like think about SolarWinds itself, right? That was system management software.
No,
right?
that's not what I was talking about.
No, I know, but hang on, I'm broadening your category. But you're right, it's at the lowest level. There's a thing in every Intel CPU that is called CSME, which is I can't remember what it's called, but there's a management CPU that's essentially in there that handles a lot of the security isolation, basically. So you're suggesting that the management, the firmware that runs that engine is part of it. No?
Yeah. I'm actually thinking of a separate CPU, not a sandbox within the CPU, but the separate CPU that controls the CPU you talk about. Which a lot of people don't even realize is there.
Well, let's be clear. I think it's, let's be clear. This is a software-focused exercise, right? It's not a hardware-focused exercise. So be careful about how far you, be careful about how far you go in that direction, because
that other
is the
CPU
software
also runs. Yeah, the other system also runs software, though.
True. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot you could talk about in terms of critical infrastructure, in terms of hardware. This is not what the exercise is about. All right. So that's a separate exercise. Yeah.
Right. So again, I mean, databases and so on. Now, weirdly enough, many systems image processing software is critical because, I mean, Android demonstrated this several times, and I bet iOS has also. Where if you process untrusted data and its subverts the system, then basically more in general parsers, so image processors, XML, JSON parsers, basically more broadly data parsers of various kinds, the ones that accept processed data and often get owned because they're the ones that first touch the untrusted data. But it's going to go crazy.
Well, and just so something wasn't captured, maybe I should just go at it as to help as well. But we talked about management engines. Let's be clear. Management engine firmware. Let's just be clear, not the engine itself. And then the piece that got lost was system management software. So system management software, which is typically separate from an operating system, but that's the core of what SolarWinds was system management software.
Great.
Yeah, and also system monitoring software.
I think Daniel has his hand up.
Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I'm not sure that it's necessarily a fixed category, but any piece of software which is on a path for establishing trust or authenticity is critical.
You're talking about authentication frameworks and that sort of thing.
I'm thinking authentication frameworks, signature checking frameworks, the trusted compute pile, all of that. Certificate
checking, all that sort of thing. Yeah.
Anything from the point at which you can go, this key is somehow fixed in hardware, through to I'm verifying that this binary I'm running is the one I'm meant to be running, kind of thing.
Yeah, it's a great point. Authentication, absolutely. That goes hand in hand with privilege, access. So absolutely.
And it also then can extend into things like identity attestation and so on. Is this the machine I'm meant to be running on? Again, can become critical because exfiltration of software and data can be a major problem, particularly can cause loss of life.
Wonderful.
This is good.
Amir, did you see the comment in the chat? I'm gonna not pronounce your name right, but Yakov. It was actually pretty interesting. A different way to sort of categorize this, like how much time and effort does it take to overcome an incident, small, medium, large, and that's another way to think about categorization.
Yeah, that's a good point. Does that have to do with, if you have any more context, availability of like alternatives as well, or is it specifically just kind of categorizing based on how hard it would be to overcome something big, basically like an incident.
I'm not sure if they're in the working group anymore. I don't see them.
Oh, okay.
Or we can just make up what we want.
Okay. But yeah, if they get a chance to provide any more context, we'd be happy to discuss that. And Lowry makes a interesting point too. When there's something critical, how would it be possible to limit its attack surface? Just to limit damage with some automatic mitigation features. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, we talk about things like secure configurations and security by default, things like that.
Can I propose that for purposes of this exercise, we not go there, because I think that's part of the larger question of, once you identify critical software, what do you do about it? And I think there's a long list, and that's one of the first ones I would do is, can I reduce the attack surface on that critical software?
Yeah.
But that would be first. But first, I got to figure out which software I care about.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. It's a good thought, though. Absolutely. I think when the time comes, we should definitely discuss that more. Mitigation strategies, things like that. Okay. I was thinking one thing we could do, I don't know if the work group is down, is we could just go, each person can go and just say in a sentence what they think critical software is. I think a lot of good info would come out of that if the work group is willing to kind of do a round table. All right. Well,
yeah,
the beauty is that this is shared with everybody. So please input comments, anything, it definitely helps. So I'm sorry, David, were you going to say something?
I was going to say, I think these categories is at best examples. What really matters is what's the impact.
Okay. Is what's the impact? Yeah,
impact
absolutely.
To the organization, society.
Yeah.
If it's not in the list, but a problem will cause you to lose your country or lots of lives lost, that's a problem.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that definitely goes into helping determine what is critical software. I mean, if it just didn't exist anymore, would everything come crashing down? Yes or no, basically. So I like that. Impact.
I have a question. Are folks planning to submit this as a position paper for this? Like, I pasted the link. So this applies to, I would say, 1 and 3. Those that could be definitely useful. So I was just curious from OpenSSF side if this could be submitted as a 2-page position paper.
I can't speak for OpenSSF. I do know that after I do my current fire drill, my next fire drill is to write some position papers for that NIST, for that executive order. But I'm just going to write them as me. I don't want to try to. I don't want to try to speak for the OpenSSF. I'll just, this is just me. And if other people want to organize something for the OpenSSF as a whole, that'd be awesome. There's very, very little time to respond if you're trying to respond by next Wednesday, though.
Yeah, that's a great point, Abhishek. That was actually kind of my inspiration for doing this tabletop exercise too, was I thought if we at least had something, it doesn't have to be a very formal position or say, this is, infallible, even if it's just an opinion or a 1-page on, this is what we think critical software is and what its categories are, I think would at least help us contribute to the conversation. I actually signed up for that conference as well. And so if we want to kind of formalize this a little bit more, I mean, I could see us putting something on our GitHub, on the work group's GitHub, just saying like, this was just some basic ideas we had on what critical software is and, a working list of what we think, the categories are. I don't know how much we want to formalize it. I guess we could leave that to the work group. But I just thought it would be a good place to start with getting some ideas on paper. And
yeah. Hey, can I ask a question? Is this a good time to ask?
Yeah,
relative to the EO?
Yeah, let's do it.
So one of the things that really has, as when I read particularly section 4, anyone who wants to just sort of narrow down on something, section 4 is really a good one to focus on. I got that hint. That was awesome. That really reduced my amount of reading time a lot. But one of the things that's really got me thinking a lot is the requirement for build. I can't remember the exact wording. I'd have to look it up. Something about that your build infrastructure is administratively separate. Okay. And the way I've heard this described as is your build servers are not are in an isolated network from everything else. Okay. I'm kind of being a little bit, I heard about this, and I've checked with a few of my friends who are security experts, and it says, oh yeah, this has been a methodology, accepted methodology for the last decade, right? And more maybe from the high security area. And so it's now coming into sort of everybody else who's affected by this thing. So I guess the question is, if anyone is actually producing, and I realize this is an open source group, so we produce source, but there's organizations, Google, maybe others, that produce binaries, right? And would be affected by this. So I guess my question is, does anybody already have practices that they think define better what this looks like, having build systems that are administratively separate?
I have to admit, I had a little trouble parsing your question.
I can try again. Sorry, I can take it to the tailor.
Can you make it shorter?
I could take it to the tailor and have it shortened for you by Tuesday. So
you noted a whole bunch of things. I'm not sure which.
No, the one thing is, and I'll restate the money question is, does anybody have build systems that follow this practice? In other words, are administratively separate?
So I don't know what the definition of administratively is here, but there is an open source project that we contribute to called Tecton that lives in another foundation. And there's been a lot of progress on that project. And one of the, I'm not sure if it's working yet or what state it's in, I can certainly find out, is doing builds in like a closed sandbox environment. So that way you can see that, it can't access anything outside what it's supposed to access.
That's really good. I'd be really interested in that, Kim. Is that something, is that
TEKTON?
I just pasted the link, David.
Oh, thank you. But
yeah, there it is, Hermecton. So it's hermetic builds inside Tecton. That's where the name comes from.
Okay, thank you. That's really helpful. Thank you very much.
Cool. So with that, I'll just close by saying thank you so much for the great discussions. Feeling it, contribute some thoughts, some comments to the document, and we kind of maybe formalize it a little bit more, or just just to create something to show for our work today. So thanks again, and if you have any questions, just hit me up directly, and I'd be happy to talk about it.
Thanks, Amir. Yeah, I like the idea of if we can get a little bit further of putting it out there as like these are ideas coming from this working group. We're working on our own sort of papers here, so I can't volunteer my time. But I think, yeah, if you want to make progress on this, or other people that want to help and circulate it for review before the deadline, I think that would be awesome. I think as long as we frame it a certain way, that would be fine. Coming from the OpenSSF.
Yeah. Okay.
So one thing I wanted to say quickly is I think this executive order is kind of signaling that they're going to try to do more. And my biggest concern is that they're going to insert giant layers of bureaucracy into some of our projects. And I really worry about a policy where they try to, for example, FIPS a bunch of different things. And that would be horrific for everybody, I think. And it would definitely not improve security overall. I don't know how everybody else feels about that, or if you've dealt with FIPS software before. OpenSSL is I mean, we did an OpenSSL audit and talked about problems that we found that affected FIPS, and they literally said, we don't care about FIPS because it's too ridiculous to deal with. So that means that improvements could have been made had those layers of bureaucracy not been there. And I think that that is a barrier that we do not want to erect in other places. So I do think that that's something that we should be thinking about, because that is a really bad pitfall that we could get into if they make the wrong choices here.
Totally agree with you, Derek. And other parts of my organization are trying to work with that exact thought in mind of, let's not make life miserable without actually fixing things.
Right.
I would say the approach, my concern, the way I've learned that's a really good way of approaching these things is to create a threat model, right? What are your assets you're trying to protect? Who are the actors who might try to do something, and what are the reasonable threats to mitigate? None of that, from what I can tell, is being done. It's all about, oh, here's some best practices, boom, let's put them in place. And so it's like it's bad practice. But I think the rush to get something going is taking over. But I totally agree with you that we do not want to create something that's a bunch of bureaucracy that's not going to help. There's some things like a SBOM requirement and some other things that will. And again, I think a lot of this is based on best practices. You're creating a binary, right? But there's also a totally, one of the things that'd be really helpful for the open source community to help with is there is a clause in there about providing some sort of provenance of the open source software you're using. Well, I'm not sure that's a part of this work group. That may be part of one of the other, OpenSSF work groups. So I think that's going to be a key. How do I establish the provenance of the open source software that I'm using as part of my, critical software, right? And I think that's going to be a biggie for us.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Cool. All right. Well, we're out of time. Good seeing everyone, and hope you have a good day.
You too, Kim. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, bye.
Take care. Thanks for the presentation, Jeff.